It's fitting as we come to this last Sunday of Epiphany, of the season of Epiphany, that we talk about light today. Of course, we do this every year on this day. You may not realize that, or maybe you do, but we get stories that involve light in some way today. You've read in the last couple emails I've sent out, Friday emails, and in my Angelus article, that it's important that in this season of light, we kind of harbor that light, we collect that light. And on this last Sunday before we enter Lent, to hear those stories of light is good because we need that light to sustain us and to carry us through Lent to the light of Easter. And so we get that today. We sometimes refer to this day as Transfiguration Sunday because the gospel in all three liturgical years is the story of the Transfiguration. Now, it can be confusing to some because the Feast of the Transfiguration, which is a high feast day in the church, is August 6th. So if that falls on a Sunday, we'll get this again, but that's okay, we'll deal with it then. But we always get it on this day because of that significance of going from the light of Epiphany into the season of Lent. This is year A, so we get Matthew's version of the Transfiguration. Year B, we get Mark's version. Year C, we get Luke's version. John doesn't have a version, so that makes it convenient then, since we only have a 3-year lectionary cycle, right? But on the other end, we also get stories of light. And they are either stories about Moses, 2 of them are stories about Moses, and 1 is about Elijah. So today we get the story of Moses going up the mountain to eventually receive the 10 Commandments from God. The other Moses story has to do with Moses going to speak with God and then coming back to the Israelites, but his face is radiant, it's beaming. Light is coming off of his face so much that the Israelites are afraid of him, so he has to veil his face. And then the story we get about Elijah has to do with him passing the mantle on to Elisha and then being carried up to heaven in the chariots of fire. Fire also being light in this case. So we get light and fire in the Old Testament. We get the light of the Transfiguration in the gospel reading, and then in that reading from Peter, we get Peter as an eyewitness to what took place in the Transfiguration during that time. But I want to start with Moses. And I want to back up a little bit from where we enter the picture today. We start towards the end of chapter 24 of Exodus, where we're just told God said to Moses, come up the mountain, and he does. But there's a lot that happens before that, and I want to draw these parallels between what is happening in the Old Testament story and what happens in that story of the Transfiguration. The two are more connected than you might think. In the beginning of chapter 24, Moses is called along with some other people. God says, I want you to come to the mountain. So Moses goes to the mountain. The Israelites all follow. But leading that pack are Moses and 3 others, so there's 4 of them. Moses' brother Aaron and 2 priest leaders of the group, Nadab and Abihu, if you want to know their names. They all come forward, along with the 70 elders who, remember, Moses had appointed the 70 to be judges and arbitrators to the people. The 70 come along, and then all the people. So they come to the base of Mount Sinai, or sometimes called Mount Horeb. And Moses sets up an altar there, and they have a feast. They have a celebration before he has to go on and do the next part of what he's going to do. But Moses sets up 12 pillars around this altar to symbolize the 12 tribes of Israel. And there they have a sacrifice, and Moses takes the blood of that sacrifice, and he sprinkles some of it on the people and some of it on the altar to bind them together in the covenant that they had made with God, to obey God's commandments and ordinances, right? That they are bound to God as the people of Israel to do these things. So that happens. And then God once again says, Moses, come up. So Moses, then it's just Moses and the 3 others and the 70 elders, and they go partway up the mountain. And when they're there, they actually get a glimpse of God. And it doesn't say whether God is standing or sitting. All we're told is that they see God's feet upon a platform, and that the platform is made of sapphire. So they're able to see that. And then God says, Moses come up. And so Moses leaves them there. He takes Joshua with him, and he goes even further up the mountain. But before he does that, they have a feast together. And then Moses and Joshua go the rest of the way, and he says, wait here. And then finally, Moses even leaves Joshua, and Moses alone goes up to the top. And then we're told the cloud covered the mountain. And what the Hebrew says here literally is this is God's dwelling place. God dwells in this cloud. That is the dwelling. When God travels in the tabernacle, it is that presence that is there. God is in that place. And we're told that the cloud covered the mountain, and the people below can see this cloud. They know that God is there. And that cloud rested there for 6 days. 6 days, equal to the number of days of creation. And that's important to remember because God creates in 6 days, and on the seventh day we're told God rested, and God makes that day holy, the Sabbath day, the day to give praise and worship to God. And so on that seventh day on the mountain, the most holiest of days, God speaks to Moses. And then what the people see is that fire, that all-consuming fire. That means God is there and God is active and God is talking, and Moses is there. And then we're told Moses is on that mountaintop for 40 days and nights. Now that number ought to sound familiar too. 40 days and nights to be the same as the number of days it rained for the flood with Noah, 40 days and nights. It mirrors the 40 years that the Israelites were in the wilderness. It also foreshadows to Jesus' time in the wilderness, being tempted 40 days and 40 nights. It also mirrors the number of days it takes Elijah. Elijah eats food to get sustenance because he goes 40 days and 40 nights to travel to the mountain to see God. So it is all connected in that sense, right? It's drawing us together there. So now move over to the story of the Transfiguration. And we're told 6 days after Peter confesses Jesus as the Messiah. So remember that story. Jesus is walking with the disciples, he's teaching them, and he says, who do people say that I am? Well, some say Elijah, some say the prophet, but who do you say that I am? And Peter says, you are the Messiah. Translated, the anointed one, the beloved, the chosen, right? And so 6 days after that took place, just like the 6 days that the cloud was on the mountain, Jesus takes a smaller group out of a larger group. He takes his inner circle of Peter, James, and John, and they go up the mountain. This mountain, some say it's Mount Tabor, some say it was Mount Hermon. Jesus ascends the mountain and is transfigured before them. He becomes a radiant light, what we say is his true form. And he's transfigured before the three of them, and they are in awe of what is taking place, right? And then the cloud comes. The cloud covers it, again symbolizing the dwelling place of God. And then we hear the voice of God. This is my Son, the beloved, the chosen, the anointed one, the Messiah, with whom I am pleased. And then God says, listen to him. Listen to him. Actually hear what he's saying to you and listen and follow what he says. So go back again as Jesus is walking and Peter has just confessed him as the Messiah. Remember what happens next. Jesus begins to tell them what will happen to him, that he will be killed and in 3 days will rise again. And Peter, remember, rebukes him and says, no, Lord, we would never let that happen. That won't happen. How can that be? And remember, Jesus says, get behind me, Satan. The adversary is getting to you. You're not focused on heavenly things. God says, listen to him. Jesus is trying to teach them all along the way, and now they get confirmation of that as God says, listen to him. And then what happens as they come down the mountain, Jesus says, do not tell anyone yet about this because they aren't ready. They aren't ready until the Son of Man is risen from the dead. Then you can talk about it. But until then, they're not ready. And clearly the disciples aren't ready either, as evidenced by Peter's actions on the mountain. So after the transfiguration, they look, and who are the two people standing with him? Moses and Elijah, the very two that we hear in the other stories on this day. Moses and Elijah, representing the law and the prophets, the two divisions of the Hebrew Scripture. Moses brings the law. Elijah, the hallmark of the prophets, right? And they're standing there. And Peter says, Lord, it is good that we should be here. Let me build 3 dwelling places, 3 booths, 3 tabernacles, if you will, to house you and keep you here. Now, my question is always this: how did Peter know it was Moses and Elijah? They didn't exactly have yearbooks back then to see what their picture was when they were in school. But if you figure the cloud's up there and God is present, they're going to know who it is, right? And maybe Jesus said, oh, hey, Peter, James, John, this is Moses. This is Elijah. I don't know. The point is, they're there. But Peter does that very human thing that Peter always does. And he gets lost in that moment. He's not thinking about how big of a thing this actually is or what he's just experienced. All he wants to do is preserve the moment. Let's stay here and never leave. And Jesus is saying, no. Our work is not here. Our work is down there. We must keep walking, keep going towards Jerusalem and towards the thing that I said was going to happen. And they do. And they walk down that mountain and they head towards Jerusalem as Jesus will begin his passion. We are at that same point. We are coming off of that mountain in this season of light, having just experienced that light of Christ. And we are walking that path to Jerusalem into Jesus' passion as we walk through Lent towards Holy Week. And we begin Lent this Wednesday. And we need that light. We need that light to sustain us in that time of self-examination, of figuring out who we are as children of God, who we are as Christians, as people of the risen Christ, so that we can then celebrate that at the light of Easter and be the Easter people that Jesus has called us to be, to continue to walk forward and to look at the work that we are to do. Now, that doesn't mean we stop doing what we're doing during Lent. Lent's not a vacation in that sense, but it's a time of deep thinking. It's a time of looking into ourselves to maybe pray what we might be when we come out on the other end of that, how we live into being those Easter people. So take this light that we are given today. Take this with you into Lent so that we may be joined together to that light of the resurrection and to the joy of Easter. Amen.